Making the client assessment. In this video, we're going to dive into what I exactly do when I'm assessing individuals, what assessments might take, some of the process. This is something that we deeply outline in the Breath Science certification. We have a whole module on this process that goes really deep into being able to convert a lead into a client, but also how to effectively demonstrate to your client that there's a problem that you can solve. Before we go into this though, I do want to give a shout out to Reese over at our Breath Collective. He's the guy who prompted me to answer this question. And I really want to give a shout out to the guys at our Breath Collective because they are individuals who really do put a solid effort into helping create safe, very well educated, and really practical breathwork facilities out there. So if you are an individual who wants to learn the art and the science of facilitation, I recommend checking out our Breath Collective. So anyway, let's dive into this. So if you're a coach, you're a consultant, anyone who works with individuals, this process doesn't just mean that you need to be a breath coach for this, although obviously we're going to talk about that context. This is going to be valuable for you because what I have spent the last 5 years trying to refine is a process that actually helps people understand their issues and also to buy into your product. That's what you want at the end of the day as a coach. You want an individual who wants to have the motivation to work with you. So before we dive into anything, the first thing that you need to know with your clients is, what is the problem? So for me, that actually occurs before I've even met the individual. If I'm on social media and someone's reached out to me, I'm kind of engaging in the conversations through my DMs to figure out what their root problem is, trying to find out what their emotional drivers are, and then obviously trying to convert them into an assessment call where we can actually run through some assessments and obviously then take them through our offerings and try to get them to buy into the product. So how do we do this? The first thing they need to do when you're actually on the call is understanding that we need to take a clinical history. How do we take a clinical history? The most important thing is listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's the ratio of which we should be talking relative to how we should be listening. We ask questions. So you're here today to investigate the problem. I noticed that in your pre-screening questionnaire, you mentioned that you have some anxiety that's causing some sleep issues and issues with focus. Can you just dive into that a little bit deeper for me? Then zip your mouth and really be quiet. But pay attention. Pay attention to the words they're using, the phrases that they are really articulating, and even the words that might create shifts in their physiology. And note these down because these are of significance to the person. And later on, this is going to help you to repeat this back to them so that you can show that you're actively listening, but also show that you care. But what you'll notice when you start these things is most people will start with symptoms. They feel anxiety. Now, what does anxiety mean? Anxiety might be different from one person to another. We might have people who ruminate on thoughts and therefore we have something to do with worry. We might have someone who gets short of breath and therefore it's an asthmatic experience. Or we might get someone who just freezes and can't take action. And that might be something to do with a nervous system dysregulation issue. And that is going to prompt us and start to allow us to think about a strategy or the best strategy to manage this individual. So we get an array of different symptoms and then we get a picture of what this person looks like and what this person's problem is. However, symptomology is logic, and logic doesn't really create an investment or a driver to change behavior. What we are bringing, however, is we're bringing the problem to surface. And that's what we want to do because we want to make sure that the individual really understands that there's a problem there. The next thing we want to do within a clinical history is actually asking a question to make it emotional. Hey sir, I know that you've just mentioned that you've got anxiety and some sleep issues and that's causing you some focus at work. Now, just talk to me about that moment. Like, really, how is that impacting your life? How's life at home? How is your performance at work? How long has this been going on for? Can you just describe that for me and just really just elaborate on what you mean by this? Now, what this is going to do, it's going to turn the individual from a logical mindset to an emotional mindset, and emotions drive behavior. Typically, negative emotions, which is what you're pulling out now, is actually going to create avoidance behaviors. So it might make a motivation that is going to help them move away from this, but it's not necessarily going to create something that is going to help them move towards the buying into your product. We're going to park that for there just for now, because what we now have is we have symptoms, we have an understanding of their emotional issues, and then what we want to do is really just clarify with the individual, is there anything else that they would like to share? What I noticed in my clinical career was that individuals always will leave out the things that they maybe feel shameful of, maybe there's some guilt around, or there's a real deep worry around, that they might actually leave it out or wait for an invitation. And therefore saying something along the lines of, is there anything else you'd like to share with me before we move forward, after you've kind of summarized what they have said. And when you summarize what they said, you use the key terms, the phrases and the things that they articulated, or change their physiology, so that you are showing that you are listening. That invitation after that, however, then allows an individual to maybe speak to something. The amount of times that I have been on a client call with someone and they have said, I'm struggling with burnout, my sleep's a real bad issue, no, I can't focus. And then when I invite them to share anything else with me, then say, oh, and by the way, I'm also addicted to Adderall, or some amphetamine pills from my ADHD medication. And that might mean that I might have to suggest, hey, right now might not be the best time for you to be doing breath work. It might be you need to have an evaluation with your psychiatrist, or have a look at your medication and to see whether you can get some form of help with your addiction. When that's in place, or if you have that rolling, then we can work together. And that obviously is a decision that you make based off your understanding and your criteria, and obviously what you're doing and working with people and how much qualifications you have. The next part of this process is the assessment. Assessing individuals, but what do we assess? Well, we only assess the problem that they talk about. If they say they've got anxiety, then I'm not going to put them on a VO2 max bike and start to then assess their performance of their oxygen consumption, because it just doesn't make sense. That specificity has not applied. So in this case, for something like anxiety, I'm going to look at a validated tool, such as the Hospital Anxiety Depression Score, which is then going to give me an indicator of the severity of their anxiety. Now, this is an officially validated scientific tool that is used by the clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists. Now, we are not those individuals, but it allows us to have a marker at week 0 that we can then measure maybe at week 4 and week 8 to just make sure that we're making progress. Other things might include perceived stress scales. This is a validated tool by the American Psychological Association that is looking at lifestyle stressors. And this has an indicator of a score between 0 and 13 of mild, 13 to 26 being moderate, and then 26 and above being high stress. And now we have an actual validated subjective scales that we can use that can give feedback to the individual to say how big is their problem or how severe is their problem, again raising the intensity of that problem itself. Now, of course, those are subjective scales that we can use. We can have what are called visual analog scales, where it's literally a scale between 0 and 10 for energy, fatigue, focus, clarity, readiness, whatever you feel you want to measure. Or I even ask my client, is there anything that you would like to subjectively measure with our time together as we move forward? And then each week we just repeat having a look at these scales to see if there's improvements. Clearly, this can also be a fantastic tool that can help the coaching process. If, for example, all the markers are improving, but there's one, maybe that's focus or clarity, is just not improving, then that might mean in the next session that you're working with that client, you say, hey, well, look, it looks like your focus and clarity isn't improving at the moment. Let's put some box breathing. That is a tool that we can use to help someone to build focus. Let's look at the stresses around how much work you're doing. Let's look at how much rest you're having in between. How long a period are you trying to focus for? Those visual analog scales can help assist in actually the coaching assessment itself. Now, obviously, there are other tools out there that we can use, objective measures such as heart rate variability. Typically, heart rate variability, I prefer to measure it using a chest band, first thing upon waking after going to the toilet, for 5 or 6 minutes, letting physiology settle and tracking that in a sheet where I will then measure over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and take a standard deviation. And when the heart rate variability deviates up or down, that is going to indicate for me to check in with the individual, see what they were doing, and perhaps have them diary around those triggers to see whether we can see what has happened for that individual. Now, you might be asking a question there. Why would you check whether heart rate variability is deviated if it goes higher? Isn't that good? Well, in fact, any deviation that's significant in heart rate variability just means that it's an outlier. If an athlete or someone does something beyond what is their normal capacity, so let's say you have a recreational athlete who wants to then run a half marathon or a marathon, and they all of a sudden, they put in a long shift of running that is beyond their normal capacity, they might have an excessive increase in heart rate variability because their body is forcing them into a heightened parasympathetic state in the aid to need to recover. That is a marker to say, hey, look, if it doesn't come back down to your normal deviation again, within a day or two, we might be starting to look at your body not able to recover from its capacity early enough. So we've got heart rate variability as another indicator that we can look at objectively. Now we can also use, if you have the opportunity, to measure directly carbon dioxide levels. So this is using a capnographer. And I will typically take a baseline capnography. I will then also investigate an individual's ability to recover from hyperventilation. And you might do a form of gradual titrated hyperventilation for a minute that drops them down to around about 25 millimeters of mercury. And then you measure for 3 minutes following that the recovery rate when you ask them to go back to normal breathing. Typically, if that does not increase by around about 11 millimeters of mercury within that 3 minutes, that could indicate something like hyperventilation syndrome. And you then will tie that into a 9-beacon questionnaire to get a more accurate representation of the total kind of look at someone's breathing behavior. So if we have an objective measure of CO2, we have a 9-beacon questionnaire, and you might even do something like a breath hold test, like a Bolt score or a 3-step breath test or an exhale max assessment to get a triangle of information, which then serves you to have confidence in your assessments. Other assessments out there that I might use are athlete anxiety scores, if I've got an athlete with performance anxiety, athlete well-being scores, which again are visual analog scales that are directly tied to more so athlete recovery. So within there it might be fatigue, it might be mood states, might be sleep quality, might be for energy levels, just to look at specifically for an athlete. If we're doing burnout, an individual have burnout, we have Maslach's burnout inventory, which can be used. But I prefer to use what's called the burnout assessment tool, and it really fits well with what I call the human function curve, and it allows for the red, amber, and green. And we have a whole module dedicated to that assessment in module 10, module 9 in the breath science certification, which then deeply looks at a strategy to manage and prevent burnout using these tools as assistance. Other things are heartbeat detection exercises. Can an individual detect their heartbeats just through subjective feeling well or not? So that's going to give you some look into their interoceptive capacities. There are interoceptive questionnaires, as well as you can put a heart rate monitor on and you can ask them to count in a minute, in 2 minutes, in 3 minutes, how many beats they actually feel, and then relative to a measurement of actually how much their heart rate is beating, we can then get an independent interoceptive accuracy view of looking at that, and that will help shape the coaching structure again. For me, interoception is at the center of understanding an individual's self-awareness and emotional awareness, and that might mean the difference between putting someone into breath holds with times, or breath holds with embodiment and just subjective feeling. If someone has poor interoceptive awareness, doing breath hold training and giving them a certain prescribed amount of steps might mean that you actually push the individual beyond their window of tolerance, beyond their capacity, and it might actually make them more stressed. So if you actually then measure interoceptive awareness and they have low interoceptive awareness, that means that they need to improve their interoceptive awareness through heartbeat sensing, affect labeling, attentional breath work, breath awareness, and even things like just kind of tuning into their body and asking themselves questions around where they may feel certain tension in their body. And things like yoga can really improve interoceptive awareness as well. So that kind of branches off and really supports the coaching journey for me of whether I'm going to go down the breath hold route or whether I'm actually going to build someone's awareness first. Other things that I will use, obviously exhale max assessment, sometimes referred as the CO2 tolerance test. I don't think it typically measures the CO2 tolerance, or there's no literature to suggest that it's kind of really aligning with CO2, just like the Bolt score is, although I do use both. Both of them are more so for ways to help someone to stay motivated as they begin to see their results improve. But a lot of people with a bulk score, they might get to 25 seconds and then start to get this anticipatory kind of state or attachment to having a good score. And anticipation creates noradrenaline, noradrenaline creates sensation, and therefore it kind of just spoils the test. So people with performance mindsets, I've noticed that the bulk score doesn't work very well. Also people with attachments to fear like panic and anxiety, the bulk score doesn't work very well, hence producing this 3-step breath test that can kind of help distinguish between those three. Other assessments that I'll use around sleep is I'll use sleep diaries, I'll use Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, and also I might look at Whoop bands or Oura rings, although I am very mindful, again, if an individual is attached to these numbers. So what do I mean, Matt? In the assessment, if I'm asking them, how well do you sleep? And the first words come out of their mouth, well, my Oura ring says I get this much X, Y, and Z deep sleep. I'm like, hey, I didn't ask that question. I didn't ask about your data. I asked about you and how well you feel you sleep. That's an indicator for me. I might actually remove these trackers to begin with. I might bring them back a little bit later to just to then track the data a little bit later when they've kind of let go of that attachment. But I'll measure via the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index or simply through visual analog scales of perception of their sleep quality. Other assessments that we teach and I will potentially use, things like a maximum breathlessness test, so a walking apnea step test to get a maximum. I will typically use that as like a 1 rep max in the gym. You've got a maximum, then you can work from percentages and you can work through percentages that you can use with individuals to work out what is 40, 50, 60% of their maximum. Then we can use the FIT principle, frequency, intensity, time, type, to create progressive overload with walking apneas. We can also do that with changing breath control cadences as well. We can also do that with exposure therapies such as straw breathing, hyperventilation. We can use signal units of distress scores between 0 and 100, how much distress is being these sessions causing you. So there are so many different assessments we can use. Obviously, we've also got physical assessments, and I'm not going to go all the way down that avenue. And then we've got questions that we can use to get an insight into someone's mindset. The objective really here is to select 3 to 4 that you feel are very specific for that individual. That might be an objective test, it might be a subjective scale, and maybe a couple of breath tests. What you want to do then is be able to link those assessments and the scores and the outcomes of those assessments to their problem. What do these assessments show you about their physiology, about their psychology, about their lifestyle, and how is that also contributing to their problem? This then gives a validation that they have a problem, and now you have an individual who really is understanding themselves and the severity of their issue. The problem with this is they might feel a negative affect. They might feel unpleasant. They might feel like, oh geez, like this is a bit worrisome. People don't usually buy into products when they feel like a scared mindset. In fact, it kind of creates avoidance like I mentioned earlier. So here is what you need to do now. You need to be able to shift the mindset. You need to shift the mindset into a positive vision. Simply asking the question, if we were to work together over the next 8 to 12 weeks or 6 months, what does success look and feel like to you? Describe that to me. Now what you have is you have the person thinking about what it could be like to be healthy, to be happy, to feel connected, to sleep well, to have energy, to have vitality, to have vigor. All these words that that person uses, note these down, because these are going to come crucial to when you create your offering or when you are going to discuss your product. From this step onwards is what I will do now is every single one of my clients has a client assessment sheet. This is a Google sheet that has all of their programming, all the assessments that we're using. We track all the data, we make percentages, graphs, and this is all taught on the course to show basically the cases and step by step to see motivation. You have them fill it out. It's a part of the process of them embodying the work and keeping accountable. Within this sheet, we have all the assessments at the bottom, all the questionnaires are at the bottom. We have a layout for the structure. I taught people how to program. We look through each week by week how to really specifically apply the practices based off the assessments that you use. Sometimes assessments come halfway through the session as well, And these assessments that come within the session are also, through the coaching structure, they're there for a particular reason. For example, the MBT comes in when we're about to do walking apneas, for example. There's no point in doing it earlier when someone might have anxiety and panic. It's just too stressful for the amount of time. So it needs to come in at the correct time. Once you have an individual who has started to state what they would like to look like, I will then use prior client sheets, all these data that I've collected, to take them through. This is what it looks like to work with me. These are the results. 100% improvement in your Bolt score. 200% improvement in your Excel Max assessment. Anxiety scores dropped by 70%. Stress scores dropped by this. HRV gradually inclining over here. Readiness scores, energy scores in this person are improved. We are then using social proofing to demonstrate to the individual, this is what it's like to work with you. Then what you do, you start to chase the yeses. The yeses are the conversion to start to get them to say yes to buy into your offer. Do you think if you were to have results like this, like client A, client B, client C, now I've just demonstrated, this is going to help you achieve X, Y, and Z, and you use the exact phrases that they were saying are the phrases that they want to feel like in, say, 8 to 12 weeks. You repeat the words back to them, so it resonates, so it sits with them, so they feel as if they are being heard, understood, and also that actually they can get those results. When they say yes, you simply ask them, do you mind if I take you through my coaching offerings now? Do you mind if I take you through the process and strategy of what I believe can help you? At the end, I'll give you the product at the price. So that is an overview of how I will assess an individual at the very beginning. I've said a lot of different assessments in there. You've got a couple of options. You can pause, you can find them, go into the literature, check them out, see what the scores are, pull them out, put them into a sheet. Or if you are interested, come and join the Breath Science certification. I guarantee you are going to find just a deeper layer to your coaching already, a deeper layer and more advanced layer to what you're offering currently, because there's nothing else out like this. It's a unique question, a unique thing. I don't teach breathwork facilitation. I teach consulting, I teach coaching, I teach people go from A to B and how to basically do this as a clinical scientist and how I have always approached this work. Appreciate you joining in. Comments, questions below. A longer one, I want to get back into this longer form content again. If you even just want to become a part of our community space, School of Breath Science community space, I'm going to drop a link below. The link will just take you to basically the sign up page. And the sign up page in our community space, we have monthly journal club, we have monthly masterminds, we have lots of videos recorded in there. There's a big crew of about 60 people in there now who you can reach out to, you can start to know, you can build a community, and in fact this is going to grow. I'm really investing a lot of money and time into the School of Breath Science now, and this is going to be a product and a service to raise the standards of scientific understanding in breathwork, but also to serve the vision that I have, which is still to see a world of healthy and happy people living connected and meaningful lives.